G.I. Joe is one of those pop culture icons that has been able to go for multiple generations because it's been able to reinvent itself for each subsequent generation. It started off in the post World War II era as rather large 12-foot tall plastic army dolls. Then during the 70s became an adventure brand, and of course its most famous incarnation during the 1980s as G.I. Joe vs. Cobra. Now, what really made that era of G.I. Joe stand out was, of course, the animated television show, which many regard as being the pivotal and the quintessential 80s cartoon show, competing with its cousin Transformers. Well, a new generation is upon us, and once again, G.I. Joe has slightly reinvented itself, again keeping the G.I. Joe vs. Cobra theme, but coming in a new format, in the animated version at least, this being G.I. Joe Renegades. Now, this show was recommended to me on the Space Battles forum. Wasn't going out seeking it, and I must say I'm quite impressed by this show. It's another one of these aimed at children. I mean, it's on the Hub Network, which is a joint venture between Hasbro and the Discovery Channel. But it is still quite enjoyable for adults, mainly because of the writing. The writers on this show are, you can tell, are huge fans of 80s movies, 80s television, and of course G.I. Joe. There are literally, what you're actually watching is G.I. Joe meets the A-Team. The premise is actually that of the A-Team. In fact, it goes so far, they're not even hiding this. The opening sequence, look it up here on YouTube. They have the announcer is basically doing the same voice and the same syntax as the opening and that speaker or announcer, whatever you want to call them, of the A-Team. The music's very similar. Even the wording's extremely similar. This show has a huge 80s vibe, and I'm very happy with it. There's a ton, I'm sure, there's a lot of things in there for people that grew up in the 80s and early 90s that they'll pick up on, that they're not writing for their younger audience. They're really writing this for the adults that are watching along. And it's quite an enjoyable show. To get the basic premise out of the way for the show is it's basically Scarlet this time goes and picks up a small team of soldiers to investigate a pharmaceutical company called Cobra. And they get framed, it said, for attacking the said company, which is actually preparing and is basically exactly what you think it is. It's Cobra, but they have a nice huge corporate front. And now that they're wanted for this attack, which they didn't actually do, well, I guess they kind of did, but they're framed and wanted by the military and are hunted down by Flint, which they basically turned into the A-Team equivalent of Colonel Lynch, which is, I kind of didn't like that because in the old series I liked Flint more than Duke as kind of a main character. They kind of did trade off. Some episodes Flint would be the main character, some episodes Duke would be. But he's shown in a gray light. He's trying to hunt down the Joes, but at the same time he is still an honorable soldier. Now let me really get into why this show I feel works. Now I've already mentioned the writing. There's a ton of throwbacks to 80s movies, 80s television. Hell, there was one I was watching. They did a perfect line-for-line recreation of the scenes from the first Star Wars movie, where Han Solo is talking, trying to fake being a guard when he's in the jail cell, by trying to give a BS conversation over the radio. It's little stuff like that that makes it enjoyable. It's also fairly action-packed and even somewhat bloody. I mean, they show cuts and bruises. It's not like, they're not killing people left and right, although they did kill one character in the first episode. But so far nothing there. But it is a little bit more violent, I guess, than previous incarnation. It's nothing like that G.I. Joe Resolute that they made a little while ago, which was purely intended for adult audiences, really. But what really I think works on this is also the villains. I mean, one of the things a lot of people kind of joked about with the cartoon series of version of Cobra from the 80s is that they were fairly incompetent. They never got anything done. You couldn't really take them seriously. Mainly because they got their ass beat every single week, and you were kind of wondering why people were still working for them. This one is very different in that the Joes are fugitives. Cobra has this big corporate front that they're using, and are they're not against the law. They're not known to the government to be this evil terrorist organization. So what basically that means is most of the time Cobra actually gets the bigger victories in the episode. They cover up their evidence. Basically, that's what most shows are. Joes try to find evidence that Cobra is really bad. Cobra thwarts them, but is unable to catch the Joes or stop the Joes from going and trying to find other evidence. But what that does mean is every episode, the Joes get the little victory, but Cobra gets the big victory. So you keep and continue to take them as a serious threat, because the Joes rarely ever score a major victory. And even if they do, they tend to, in the next episode, lose it. Perfect. There was one episode where the Joes caught stole some discs that would show that Cobra Commander is using this digital disguise to give these public addresses, and they got away with it. But in the next episode, Cobra steals it back and destroys their evidence, but they were able to escape the authorities. So it does, I think, from a storytelling standpoint, makes the villain a serious threat. Now, the one downside is it is only concentrating on basically 5 characters, with really no additional Joes, shall we say. No additional good characters. I mean, they'll occasionally have a guy of the week, but he's kind of just there. Back in the old days, they had an entire army. They would pull up different specialists for every mission, basically. Sure, most of the cast would remain the same, but now we'll see how long this continues. I have a feeling if they want to really keep a narrative progressing, maybe they'll eventually get a little bit more support. And kind of their whole thing is they want to get evidence to General Abernathy is kind of the main conflict. Maybe eventually they'll get enough where he'll give them unofficial support and go, you know what, I'm actually believing you, but we need to investigate this further, so I'm going to make you guys a Black Ops outfit. Maybe they'll get a few more guys as resources, and maybe we'll eventually have this thing blow up to where it's going to be old school, here's the Joes, here's a Cobra, basically an open warfare. Which would be kind of cool, because that's what really we want to see. It is a completely different beast, like I said, because of this, than the old school television show. I'm not going to overly complain, though. It's intended for a new audience at its heart. It's intended for this next generation. But it does do a very good job at pleasing the old fans of the television series, enough to where it's watchable. I mean, there's really nothing on that time slot on Friday nights, especially if I'm not going out, I'll watch it. But I would recommend it. If you are a fan of the old series, this is certainly worth checking out. It's definitely takes itself more seriously than the previous attempt to reignite the Joe brand, which was Sigma 6. And it's, again, like I said, it's kind of like Avatar, as when I reviewed that. It's a show that you can take as an adult and enjoy it, as long as you can get over the fact that you're really watching something intended for children. But we're all children still at heart, right? It's also this full of explosions. That helps too. That's it for now. Signing off.